welcome to another episode of Metal Mastermind. Your host and co-founder, Jason Stallworth, and also host and co-founder, the great
Ken Candelas.
We're back.
Here we are for another episode, man.
Yes. Oh man, we got an interesting episode. I know I always say that, but this is really digging deep into the way we listen to music, Ken. You know, we always kind of start the podcast before we start the podcast. We start talking about stuff, and it's like, hey, you know what? This would be a great topic. And the topic is modern music, how modern music is recorded. We won't get into the nitty-gritty details of that, but how it's recorded and what you're hearing, the end result, and what the results of those results are for the listener. And Ken, we're talking about auto-tune, man, before we actually hit the record button here, dude. I mean, give me your thoughts on that, man. And we've talked about this before, and I know we might have some different perspectives, but what are your thoughts on the whole auto-tune situation on vocals?
Well, I forget the guys who made auto-tune, but I remember that they used it on Cher. That was the first instance of auto-tune. And funny enough, when they created auto-tune, they very much kept it a secret from everybody. They're like, when people come over, like, put the cloth on the device so people don't see it, type of thing. And and after a while, one person, goes like, "Hey, what's that?" And then they're like, I guess the cat's out of the bag now.
But wait, let's back up 1 second though. So Cher's been recording music her entire life since what, 70s or whatever. I mean, so someone of her caliber and many people, she doesn't need auto-tune. And correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know the story, but they use the auto-tune to get that effect. So it wasn't to tune her vocals. It was to get that really kind of just cool and different effect for if you believe in life after love, something like that, right? So it wasn't used for the purpose of, and again, I may be wrong, but Cher does not need auto-tune. I don't think most people who can sing really need it. We'll get into that, but she used it as an effect to get an effect, kind of like I put some reverb on my vocals. It's an effect. It's not changing my pitch or anything. It's not correcting anything. It's just to get a different sound. So she wasn't using it for the purpose of, well, I need to make sure that my pitch is perfect. She was using it as an effect, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's changed over the course of many, many years. I mean, now you've got auto-tune by Antares, and you've got Melodyne by Solemnity, which that's another very interesting backstory. It's actually, Melodyne was created by a geologist.
Wow, dude. Wow.
Yeah, studying earthquakes and seismic waves, which when you look at Melodyne's like user interface, it makes so much sense now because it does look like a seismic chart.
Wow. I have that, by the way, in PreSonus Studio One comes with like a light version. I've never used it. Wouldn't even know how to use it, but I see it in there.
Yeah, I think they use something called like a ARA technology or something like that. And basically what that is, it's embedded into the program. So you can just, use Melodyne as if it were almost like MIDI information. It's really, really very powerful. But yeah, I mean, auto-tune has, it's got a stigma around it nowadays that, everybody uses it. And I've had this discussion with several people on the proper use of auto-tune, and it's a balance. Sometimes I've heard them, create music and they do more auto-tune than's necessary. And I said, if you really want the person to connect with this song, I think it's actually important to kind of lighten up a bit on the auto-tune, like give a little more human element to it, because when you hear it auto-tuned, it's a style. Yeah, you can totally attribute that it's a style, but there is something about auto-tune that disconnects the person with the content that they're listening to. And I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to still the delivery, the performance. And, if auto-tune is lightened up, and the performance then becomes really unable on its own to deliver the message, then that's where auto tune becomes a crutch, and that's what we need to try and avoid. I think there's a lot of integrity to still being able to sing, and if you're using auto tune, it's really just for the nuance of it.
Yeah. Well, see, I feel like, and let me just, I'll state my opinion on this. Not that it matters, because it doesn't. It's just Jason's opinion, and who am I, right? But my opinion, it used to be a little bit different. It used to be like, well, auto tune, why would anybody use that? But now, after talking with Nick Z, I had a conversation with Nick Z. He's going to be mastering my album, by the way, probably in about less than 2 weeks. I'm going to be sending those files over to him to master. But we're talking about auto tune. I'm like, I don't want that on my voice, period, at all. I am, and I'm not the best singer in the world. I will not make any sort of claim. I know that I'm not. But if it's that bad to where I need auto tune, well, guess what? I'm going to go re-record it, and I'm going to try to sing a little bit better. And if I get it to the point where it's acceptable to me, it's like, okay, I'm singing in key, I'm good. Any imperfections or nuances that I might have in that vocal performance, I want that, because Ken, I feel like we're missing the human element. So my stance is like, I don't care if anybody else uses it. Do what you want. It's your music. It doesn't matter to me. But me personally, I don't know that I ever want auto tune to touch my voice or be anywhere near the track or anywhere even in the studio on my records, because I guess you take a little pride in being able to perform your own music. If I'm going to go on stage, well, I'm not going to use some auto tune. So why would I use it in the studio? And they actually make tuning pedals, pitch pedals. I have a pedal, the Mic Mechanic. I bought it for the compression, reverb, and delay because it sounds really good live, but there's a pitch correction. Well, that level is all the way at 0. It is completely off when I perform live, because there's no way in hell I'm going to perform live and have auto tune. Why? I feel like I'm cheating the audience if I do that. If I screw up, and it's not that I don't go flat or sharp sometimes. Again, I'm not the best vocalist out there, but I'll own my own talent. I'll own my mistakes. I'll own my nuances. And I just feel like that I would rather hear the performance of that person's voice, whether it's perfect or not. There's no such thing as perfection, for one. Even if you auto-tune something, that doesn't make the song perfect. It doesn't. Actually, I feel like it just takes away. It takes away from the, and I'm sorry to ramble on this, because I know he has some things to say about it as well. But I feel like personally, and again, I could be wrong, guys. This is just my opinion, but I feel like that a lot of people, or I feel like that older music, especially 70s and 80s, is still listened to more than any other era of music, and it's revered in a manner that newer music's just not revered. We say that auto-tune's a new standard, but is that really a standard if people just if they're still listening to the old stuff more? And that could be nostalgia, that could be a lot of different reasons. But I feel like that when people talk about new music, especially like metal and rock and that sort of thing, a lot of people say, well, everything just kind of sounds the same. I think if that's the case, if that's true, I think the moving around of the drums and the auto tune and trying to make everything perfect, that might be what's, I don't want to say ruining music, but it might be a thing.
Well, let me give a little bit of insight here, because when I was working on Good Morning America, man, you would be so disappointed in how many people come on to that show with auto-tune live for the show.
Wow, dude.
Yes. And the reason for it, I was told, was the record labels simply use it as insurance. They don't trust that the artist is going to perform 100% all the time. Nevertheless, on a broadcast show that's going to be, put out to millions of people. Mm-hmm. So they said, no, we know they can sing, but we just don't trust them enough to sing it correctly that day. Yeah. So they utilize autotune quite often, and we have to run that through all the software that we have on our end, and we'll record actually the dry vocal separate in case auto-tune fails.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's kind of like, yeah, we split the signal right from the microphone and record the dry, but it's not being used. And then it goes, through the wet into auto tune, and that's the one we typically use. But if for some reason, because auto tune is a computer, so if the computer fails live on the
Mm,
show, we always have a backup. Um, but yeah, no, a lot of artists do that, and
very interesting.
if that's not much of a standard for everybody else, then I don't know what is, because the record labels are absolutely even like requiring it. It's kind of nuts.
Wow.
In the case of doing a mix for somebody, that might be the case where it's like the record label won't allow it to not have auto tune. So it depends on who's in control,
Mm,
and that kind of requirement can be even against the artist's own wishes. If they don't know about it, then they don't. But if they do know about it and they don't want it, they may not be necessarily in control of it. So
well,
I
that
guess
makes a lot of sense.
that's
Yeah.
one of the freedoms of being an indie musician, you could say. It's
Yeah.
you get to choose the novelty of not having to use auto tune. And I mean, metal is by its nature always been such a very underground genre,
Yeah. Yeah.
which has its roots in authenticity. So I totally understand the concept of that. And I've said this sort of analogy before, but when I talked to Michael Romeo about my own music, Homeric, it wasn't about auto tune. It was about drums and aligning the drums. And
Okay.
he said, or actually, it was not really about aligning drums, because that wasn't the issue. It was more about using samples.
Okay.
And I guess this is kind of a similar relevance to using auto tune, because when you do samples, it's not necessarily the authentic recording. It's an enhancement, right?
Right.
It's artificial, and so when you add that to your music, he told me, it says, well, this is a standard. It's definitely something that's being used all the time right now. But when he heard my original recordings, he said they sound organic, but they don't sound epic. And you know, I was like, okay. That moment just made me really kind of realize that what I was looking for with my own music wasn't actually very realistic at all. It was a big epic sort of type of orchestration, and it was in almost a sense. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of like just Japanese anime.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much.
It's got like this fantastical element that like anime might have.
Right.
um, and I needed to embrace that in order for my music to reach the level that it was supposed to. But
So,
in this case, it's a stylistic choice, and that served the song by doing that. It doesn't work for everyone, though.
well, that's what it's about, right? It's about, and so let me back up for a second there. When I say I'm not using auto tune and I don't care to use certain tools, it doesn't mean that I don't think other people shouldn't use them. Again, it's irrelevant what I think for one. I just kind of like to pass on the things that I'm doing for myself because it might encourage someone else. Like, you know what? I want the real thing. I don't want to church it up. But if the song calls for that, like Homeric, it's much more in depth than just guitars, drums, bass, and some vocals. Right? My album is just that. That's it. So I don't want to use a lot of elements. Right? Cameron Fleury recorded the drums. He's a phenomenal metal drummer. Now, are his drums perfect every little beat? Is it perfect throughout the album? No, it's not. It's a very much an organic recording. It's mixed very well, but I'll take those little nuances and I'll allow that to bring the song to life. Whereas in your case, Ken, you're using some samples, you're using some things because your song, your music is much more than just a rock and roll or heavy metal album. This is a
Right.
storyline, right? This is so I get it. I get it. We're talking about your album it could be compared to something. Homeric can be compared to something like making a Star Wars movie or Lord of the Rings or something like that. You know what I mean? So you've got a lot of theatrics and other things involved. So I get that, and that makes total sense. And I'll even say, if I were in a band, like you guys know, I love metal. I mean, that's tried and true. But I also love acoustic. I play just as much acoustic as I do heavy metal, and I also, believe it or not, love a lot of like the '80s pop. Like I love the Pet Shop Boys. So if I'm going to start, Ken, if you and I are going to be the what we call ourselves, Pet Shop Boys. We call ourselves, what would we call ourselves? I'm trying to think of a cool name. I can't think of anything. The Ken and Jason Boys. All right. So if we're a Pet Shop Boys cover band, for example, and we're doing something like that, well, we may not even have a drummer. We would just have an electronic drum beat because that's what that style calls for, and you're okay with that. I know a lot of the pop music, that's just what they do, and they use autotune or whatever. But for me, for rock and roll and heavy metal, for my albums anyway, I don't want that stuff used on my projects. Not this project anyway. If I ever did like you know, you guys may not know this, but there was a time in my life where I listened to a little bit of the Euro techno and trance stuff. I kind of like some of that stuff because it's got the heavy synth in there.
Cool.
So your beats and that, because you don't really have a drummer for that, those beats are perfectly aligned at the 120 BPM, whatever the magical BPM is, right? So I get it in certain, like you said, the project, the song, whatever it calls for, you do that. But I just don't feel like for my own music, for rock and roll and heavy metal, I feel like that if I use those tools, it's going to take away from the life. It's going to suck the life right out of my music. I'd rather have some imperfections and own those imperfections and have those little nuances that I think that we don't realize that we're hearing from like the 70s and 80s, but they're there. There's those imperfections. There are the times when Kirk Hammett's finger slips off the fretboard during the Master of the Puppet solo. Is like, oh, that was a mistake. Oh, that was a good mistake. We're leaving that thing in there. You know what I mean? So that kind of thinking around it.
Yeah, I think the core issue is many people, they default to using autotune, and I
Mm.
think that's the error. I think we need to consciously decide whether it's necessary or not. When you start off with a great recording, and that is literally like a great performance is the first thing in our golden rules of recording.
You've always said
So
that, dude. You've always said that from the beginning.
yeah, we've always said that it's always have to be a great performance. And when you get a great performance, you know, auto tune is not that necessary, in these cases. So really, it needs to be either a tool because, something needed either like a quick turnaround and, we couldn't execute it the best way with the amount of time that we had left. So, okay, we got to use autotune to get it to the finish line. But it's not like, all right, from the get go, it's going to be autotune. And it's like, no, why not just focus on trying to do this right first? The only other way that using autotune in the beginning is okay is if you're using it as a stylistic choice of, emphasizing, like you have to emphasize the use of autotune,
That's an effect. Yeah.
as an effect. Exactly. And so that I understand being used, but yeah, I'm a fan of let's get it right because, with even with like Homeric, I'm using a tiny bit of Melodyne just to, eat the performances where I want them. Sometimes I'm not even using Melodyne to correct pitch, but I'm using it to turn formants of a voice around. And formants are like these, natural resonances that are in our bodies. It's what makes me sound the way I do. It's what makes you sound the way you do. So, and with autotune, plugins, you can attribute a change to make somebody sound a little bit different. And what I did was use that in order to make, either Elizabeth sound a little bit more demonic or a little bit more shrill, just to make those slight little tonal changes. And that's really cool, in my opinion. You also have other things like pitch shift and whatnot that have been around for a long time. And those are also interesting tools to mess with. But yeah, at the end of the day, I always come back to, it starts with, let's just get the best performance that we can. And whether auto tune is even necessary or not. Sometimes when I run through the auto tune plugin, it's like it's actually not doing anything at all
Right,
because
right.
the
Yeah,
performance was great, you know?
yeah.
So we should always aspire to get a great performance and use auto tune if necessary as a secondary tool, but not as, I need to rely on auto tune because I just can't execute it the way I want to. That is
I don't
not the way to use auto tune.
Yeah, I don't think most singers really your wife Ellie. She has a great voice, and I don't know if she uses auto tune on occasion or whatever. But in my opinion, she doesn't need it.
Yeah,
Because I hear her singing some live stuff like on her Instagram and stuff like that. I mean, she absolutely doesn't need anything for her voice. I mean, I can understand it if you're going for some kind of effect or whatever. And for death metal, like you were saying, if we're singing some demonic sounding vocals or whatever, right? It's deep growls and stuff like that. Auto tune, there's not really there's not really anything to tune there. You know what I mean?
right.
But if you're using it to get some kind of different effect or sound out of it, yeah, I guess I get that. But no, I mean it's a good conversation. And again, I don't want and now the other side to this. I have a lot of respect for the sound engineers and people that mix because they're just doing a job. Their job is not to perform the music. Their job is to, and again, this is the flip side of things. And I was kind of like, I'm mixing my own record, by the way, and I'm going to get some help, of course, Ken, from you, and just some ears. Eddie Bourne, drummer for Siren, he's got a really good ear. Uh, Cliff Feldman, Riff of Cliff. He's the face of Replay Guitar Exchange here in Tampa, and also guitars for Quasimojo. So I'm going to get people that are in the industry, active in the industry. Brad Mader from Must Not Kill. I'll have him listen, and again, yourself, Ken, to give me some feedback on what you think. Um, because I think that's important to get people to get experts, yourself and these other guys they're in the industry, they're out there doing it.
Right.
So yeah, I'll get feedback from them as far as the mixing process goes. Um, but I'm gonna do the best I can with what I have, as opposed to sending it off to someone else. But if I were to send it to someone else, Nick Z, he's gonna master it for certain. We've already got that covered. But if I were gonna send it to someone else, I'd have to make the decision to say, am I gonna like hover over whoever's mixing, like do it this way, or am I gonna just like do my part and let them do their job? So that's the other side to that. Like you were saying earlier, Ken, if you're in a band, you're on a label, the band members may not have a choice because the label might be saying, "We own your ass right now, so you're gonna just do whatever we tell you to do." Again, a perk of being an independent musician, right? Because you don't have to do that if you don't want. But to your point, though, uh, there's that part of it, and then there's I do have a massive respect for anyone that mixes music and engineers and does this, like Nick Z himself. He's a professional at it. He does it for a living. Bands go to him, they pay him, good money to do what he does to make them sound great. So I have a lot of respect for that. Whether he uses autotune or not, it's irrelevant. It's the overall big picture that he's making sound great. And as an engineer, a mixing engineer, you're going to do whatever it takes to make it sound the best because your name is attached to that. So I understand that. I do understand that.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation, man. I think with when you're the engineer and you're trying to offer your insight, the artist may listen or may not, and sometimes because we as engineers tend to be producers ourselves, we try to always think about what we think is best for the song, and separating the two might be a little bit difficult, especially if you know that this is going to be something with your name on it, of course, as
Yeah,
well. So they're trying their best, and sometimes it's just a dicey situation because if you have a rock solid uh, you know philosophy about what you're doing here, and you don't want to waver on that, it's not up to them, it's up to you to make that clear, and
yeah,
we will take that and say, this is an absolute no-go. Okay, no problem, we'll move forward. We'll try our best to move around any roadblocks that get in the way if
sure.
this was an issue. Um, I would just say that, if you're going that route, and goes for anybody, just be prepared if there needs to be things that need to be re-recorded.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's going to be necessary, and that's what you have to do as your own producer when you're in the booth, when you're recording those vocals, and being very honest, and having somebody that you trust. And tell me a little bit more about this, because you said, actually, very interestingly, before we got on here, that you were not going to record the vocals at your own place where you have your comfortable studio. Let's dive into that, because it's I think what you're telling me by doing that is, hey, I don't want to put my producer engineering cap on here.
Yeah.
I want to be the artist today. And so what's that process going to look like for you?
So I tried recording. Now I did record the vocals, and I've recorded a lot of vocals in my studio. It's a very small 10 by 11 room here. Most of you guys have seen it, and it's not perfectly treated. I do have some sound treatment here. I've got some big some blackout curtains and another heavy curtain for a filming part that I do, where I film my courses at. So that does help absorb. They're very thick materials, thick cloth. But all that said, neither here nor there. I did record the vocals for Masterpiece in 2019 in my studio. What I ran across this time, and I kind of ran across this last time as well, recording metal vocals, is that I get headaches. Now, keep in mind, guys, I sing live 2 to 3 times a week for 3 and 4 hours at a time. Of course, there's breaks taken, but you guys know I do live solo gigs, so I sing like every day, and because I'm always doing vocal exercises thanks to Ken's wife. I keep calling her your wife, but she's fiance, dude. I'm sorry. I'm
That's
I'm, I'm
okay.
I'm rushing their marriage here.
I have to get used to that term.
Yeah,
For
you gotta
sure.
get used to the wife. Just remember, happy wife, happy life. But Ellie, thanks to her vocal exercises and Metal Vocal Virtuoso. By the way, check that course out, Metal Vocal Virtuoso. That's an awesome course on metalmastermind.com, as well as Ken's theory course. He's got metal music theory, and we're talking about mixing. We've got Nick Z's mixing course there too. So just a quick plug: head over to metalmastermind.com after the show here. But what I found more so than anything, this is the pain point of singing and recording my voice, but then having not necessarily to produce and that sort of thing, but just the pain point of having to go back to the DAW every time and press stop, go back, delete, start again, and all that. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to be behind the console and trying to record my vocals. It just doesn't work. And I was getting headaches, getting very frustrated. Um, and I actually captured, there's one track that I may actually keep for this song, the album title song, Overcome It. I like the vocals on it, but I had a massive headache after doing those. And I think a lot of it is I'm feeling the stress and probably not using the proper breathing techniques. Keep in mind, again, I'm trained at this because I sing out 2 or 3 times a week, 3 to 4 hours at a time. I have no issues singing live. I almost wish I could just sing live and just capture that and go go from there. But all that said, I've decided to go to another studio to record my vocals. Cliff, again, the Quasimodo guitarist and face of Replay Guitar Exchange here in Tampa. I've got a session scheduled with him most of the day on Monday. We'll capture some good YouTube footage from that too. But he has offered to help me do that. So he'll have the vocal booth set up, and that'll be where I'm singing, and I do not have to press any buttons. So I am so excited about this, and I think it's just the going more because I know how I want to sing the vocals. I know how I want them to go, and there's not really a lot of complexities. But yeah, I'm just real excited about that, man. It's
100%.
it comes down to you really in most cases you shouldn't try to do everything. And I know a lot of people will say, "Well, I'm a self-made person. I do it all on my own." The problem is you become your own weakest link. You're not good at everything. You're not the best at everything. So I know that me trying to, produce and engineer and run the DAW and run the studio and record vocals, having to go back and forth, that doesn't work. And in order to really do that, well, I've got to have my mic in close proximity to the computer. Well, that doesn't really work out so well either. Um, and I don't have a standing desk, so I have to either lean over to operate the DAW or sit down. And of course, you don't want to sing sitting down. So all these little things, I know they don't sound like a big deal, but they kind of add up. So all that said, if you're a vocalist and you want to record vocals, I strongly suggest either go into someone else's studio and have them manage the DAW while you just look pretty and sing. Or if you can get somebody to come to your studio and do that, I just prefer to go somewhere else. Um, I feel like I need to be in a different environment. I feel like I'll do just better. I don't know if I can explain that why, but
Well, I think the psychology behind that is just like you are getting ready for a performance like you do when you do live,
yeah,
you
you're
know?
right. Yeah,
And
that,
so it's more of a mental game than anything else. And this is the other side of being like an indie musician, which is not that great, which is you have all the technology and the comfort in the world to be able to make everything you want at home, but is it the right place to do it?
right,
There's
right.
still value in going to a place and preparing yourself to make the final performance that you seek for your album.
Yeah,
Like I have, drums and guitars, and I could get microphones to do it all here at home, but I may not choose to do that. I may choose to take my drums and lug them all the way into another studio in
yeah.
Manhattan, just for the simple fact that when I go there, I know I'm ready to perform, and we are going to get the best sonic capture, way better than what I can acquire here at home. Just because, simple things like, hey, playing in a big drum room sounds awesome.
Oh man,
you know, so those kinds of things, and even as simple as just like a vocal, like,
yeah,
you know, uh, like the guys from like Killswitch Engage, I know they go and rent out, vocal studio time to make their vocals, sound the best that they can be.
yeah.
They're not recording from home, man. They're doing it right, and you know, studios still have value for that purpose.
They do. And Cliff he has a home studio, but his room's bigger than mine, and he has a little bit more professional setup than what I have, and plus he's a good engineer. He's good behind the console and all that. I've heard his stuff, and it just. But you mentioned the ambience, like, and I remember you going to Kia Studio to record drums
Yeah,
for Metal Songwriters Forge, our songwriting course, and of course, "You Are Your Master," the song that Ken and I wrote and released. Ellie, Ken's wife. We'll just do wife instead of fiance. It's easier. One syllable instead of two. She sounds amazing on that. By the way, I love her vocals. I love the diversity she has. And but you recorded drums there, and I just remember seeing you on the video. I'm like, I told you this, Ken. I'm like, Ken is in his element right now. He is there, right there. And I kind of think of it like we like to cook at home sometimes, right? My wife, she can make some pretty mean Thai food. I love it. I can grill a good steak, good stuff. But you know what? There are a lot of times when we want to go out to eat. We love our mom and pop places, or maybe we go to a good steakhouse or something like that, just to be out for the ambience. The food's
yeah,
good at home, but it's good out there too. But sometimes you just want a different ambience. You get a different feel for that. So I kind of look at recording like that. Uh, like my studio, I can record guitars. I write here. I record guitars here. I mic up the amps. I can record the bass tracks here. I can do that all day, every day here, right here in my studio. Actually, I probably prefer to do it here because I feel like I have just ultimate freedom. But vocals, yeah, I already know, and of course we'll talk about this later. I already know that it's going to be spectacular compared to what I can do here on my own because I've got somebody. It's kind of like I'll give you another analogy. It's kind of like going to lift weights. You're on the bench press. You've got some heavy weight, man. Recording vocals, to me, it's kind of heavyweight, right? You can do it by yourself, or you can ask someone to come spot you. So that way, if you get stuck, they can just lift the bar off of you or help you out or motivate you, whatever. So I kind of attribute it to having a spotter as well. You're not on your own. You're not responsible for everything that happens that day. Again, you just show up, look pretty, and sing. You know,
yeah. Or even like back to that analogy of cooking, it's like that's the difference between just eating a meal at home and making it a date. You know,
yeah, yeah,
it's
it's true.
it's just these kinds of differences. They're psychological differences, man, and they're so powerful And I mean, how many times are we, talking about, oh, we got to set a vibe for the studio,
Yeah.
man? And it's like, well, yeah, why do we got to set a vibe? Because there's a mental game with all of this. And I tell so many of my students in all the places that I teach, it's, hey, this is not really an engineering industry. This is a people industry. You are there to manage people's emotions in the moment and capture that detail at an at a quality recording spectacle for this. So they sometimes forget that, and they end up always coming back to me and being like, why didn't this work? Or I can't seem to figure this out. And it's like, well, okay, the things that you learn in in a trade school or a college or anything about refining the skill is all because the purpose of refining your skill is to eliminate the roadblocks for the creative flow. So the creative flow needs an uninterruptible power supply. Okay.
Yeah,
A
it does. It really
UPS
does.
like we use for our own computers and gear, right? Why do we need a UPS? Because if the power goes out, it doesn't interrupt the flow, right? Because we got a battery backup, right? And it's kind of like that too, man. You're working out all the kinks so that you have a smooth performance, a smooth studio session. That's what it's all about. It's all about them, the performer, the artist that's in the booth. You're serving them so that it can serve the song, because nothing's more important than the song. So you got to get that in your head. And if you need to get out of your comfort space of being in your own studio, but you're trying to cut corners because you don't have, the right acoustic treatment, you don't have the right microphone, you don't have the right things to make it happen, go to a studio, spend the money, get the time. It will save you so much time in the long run by just having a fantastic recording. You won't regret it. You really won't. I feel like many times we get too comfortable saying, we don't need to go to this place or that place. Do it for
Yeah.
your own guitars, man. Like, even though, you have the freedom of being at home, it's like you could record DI. You could record and then like mic it up in a proper studio for like the ultimate tone if you want to go that route.
You could
It's
do that. Yeah. And
you
that's
can totally do that. And
don't be your
it
weakest
can be
link,
a
right?
lot of fun. Yeah,
Hey,
don't be your weakest link.
yeah, don't be your own weakest link, guys. That's the thing. Yeah, and yeah, you can do everything at home, but again, it goes back to what Ken said earlier, and we talked about this when we first started Metal Mastermind a couple years ago. Ken, you brought up the golden rules of recording, and I didn't even know what those were. Of course, I understood them once you put it out there, but one of those rules was the performance. Get a good performance. That's first and foremost. It doesn't matter auto tune or no auto tune, moving stuff around. If you can't capture that great performance and just the life that gives, then I mean your record, your song's not going to be that great. And I think that was the beauty of some of the old recordings. A lot of bands would just go in the studio and record together. So that may even bring another element. And of
Totally.
course, I don't do this because I'm a solo guy. I have to hire out the drums and I get to recording tracks. But the bands that recorded together back in the day, and then had it mixed after the fact. I mean, there was magic, man, because that's a band performance. It's like, okay, you hear the performance, right? You hear the record, but it's almost like a live record because a lot of those bands were recording it right there. They were doing it right there. So you got a different feel, you got a different vibe, and if you want to get into the kind of the fluffy spiritual side of things and that earthy type thing, it's like you have something magical that's being created with people together, and I think that there's something to that. In fact, I'd love to get with a band, be a part of a project that's how we record. We just go in the studio and we all play live, no backing tracks, nothing. Maybe a click track to count off, or just have the drummer count off. but just record the whole thing live and then mix that live recording after. I think that would be magical, dude.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't talk too much about Four Trips Ahead, but Four Trips Ahead is very much like that. We go a little more old school.
Yeah, you
We
guys are
go
rock and roll. You guys are pure rock and roll, dude.
Yeah, it's we call it melodic hard rock. You know, we get in
Yeah,
there and it's very much okay. The four of us are in the studio
yeah.
and we're all going to record, and we feed off of each other's energy.
Oh, I love it.
And yeah, we're running through, you know, an SSL G plus 4000 console, and it sounds like freaking amazing because it's the right performance, the right instruments when we record them.
Yeah,
You know, you got the right room, the right microphone, the right placement of the microphone, and you got the badass preamps that come from this SSL. So, you know, it's all the 6 points of what we've been talking about of the golden rules. And that's why, you know, I'm so proud of, you know, everything that Four Trips Ahead has made.
that's awesome.
Um, yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I love continuing to play with these guys, because at the end of the day, we all do this because we want to make good music, you know, and that's really where our heart's at. But we also treat this professionally. Like, this is getting it up a notch, you know. We will rehearse for years to then get into the studio and say, hey, we're ready, you know, let's rock and roll. And we nailed all the songs in one day, because we know them like the back of our hand. You know, it's just so important, man. I can't overstate it enough. And going back to the very beginning of our podcast of talking about like auto tune, you realize, you know, when you're so over prepared for something like that, man, it's like, who needs auto?
There you go. I mean, yeah. I mean, Four Trips Ahead. I need to listen to more of you guys. I remember listening for the first time a couple months ago. I'm like, man, this is. I'm impressed by Four Trips Ahead. This is a. It's just a. It's a solid rock and roll band. You know, and you can. I don't want to say that Four Trips Ahead that your band is bringing back anything, because I don't. I'm starting to get away from that concept of like, well, we need to go back to the 70s and 80s. Like, I get it. There are a lot of things that are better, but there are a lot of things that maybe weren't as great. You know, I
You know,
want to
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Well, I want us to think of like not going back to bring something back, but creating something new. You may be using some different tactics than what the quote unquote standard is, which I don't really believe that's a standard, right? I don't think that it's better. I don't think that auto tune saying that's a higher standard, that doesn't make it better. Okay, we've got to get that concept out of our head. Sometimes it makes it worse, right? But you guys going back to maybe a more an older school method of recording doesn't mean that you're back in the 70s or 80s. You're creating music that's yours. Four Trips Ahead, I've heard you guys. You guys sound authentic. You don't sound like anybody else.
Yeah.
But you're just using some organic tactics to capture that raw energy and that raw emotion that you get. If that makes sense.
Well, it's a modern sound for sure. You know, we've got modern recording techniques applied to Four Trips Ahead, but I think, you know, something that's actually funny that I'm glad you said. You know, we're not necessarily bringing back from an era, but we're
Right.
reclaiming it.
Mm,
And
okay,
it's
I like
funny
that.
because that's actually Four Trips' slogan: reclaim rock music.
I love it.
Um,
Yeah,
and I love that too because it's the spirit of rock. It's the spirit, the intention of rock, but it's totally modern in its approach and its sound, and it's progressive, and it's got, you know, every ounce of making something in the 21st century. So I think, you know, that's important. You know, you can still retain the spirit of what it is that you want and use modern techniques, as long as you don't allow those modern, you know, tools to be your crutch. You don't want that.
right.
You want to always have the music and the performance stand on its own 2 feet. That's the best that I can, you know, summarize in all of this. It's been a great conversation with you, Jason.
Man, it has been, dude. So speaking of that, I think it's time for our song of the week, guys. Well,
What did you choose for this week?
yeah, I'll start out with I'm looking at it on my phone right now too. The song is called "Destroyer of the Universe," and this was released on an album called "Searcher Rising" back in 2011 by the Swedish death metal band Amon Amarth. I love this song, dude, because it just gets very brutal. I can tell you there's no auto tune or moving around of stuff in this thing, man, because it's just a brutal tune. Destroyer of the Universe, track 3 on Amon Amarth's album Searcher Rising. Yes, good stuff, man.
Their Viking stuff is just incredible, man.
Their live shows are credible, dude. You're talking
Yeah,
about, oh, dude.
oh,
Yeah. Well, they got the horns in the background. They brought up, when I saw them, I think it was in 2017, 18, something like that, in Ybor City in Tampa. They brought out like archers and all that. They had swords. It's just such cool theatrics.
that's incredible. My song of the week is "More Than Meets the Eye" by Testament.
Ooh,
Um, I love Testament, and I've always felt like this one from the Formation of Damnation. That's the album. Um,
yes.
I love the galloping feature in this. I feel like, and I've had a chance to work a little bit with Alex Skolnick
Yeah.
in my experience here, and it's just been awesome seeing the guy play. I mean, that guy is literally a machine. He is so good at what he does. He's
Yeah.
too good.
No, he's phenomenal, dude. No doubt. And I love about Alex is, I mean, he can shred, right? But he, his solos speak to you in a different way that a lot of guitar player solos do, in my opinion. Yeah, he can do the fancy stuff, and that's great and all, but the what he comes up with, when we're talking about how music impacts you, what he comes up with, the melodies and the things that he puts out there, they're just captivating. I remember the first time hearing "Practice What You Preach."
Yep.
The solos in that were just amazing. Man, it's just crazy. That entire album, amazing. So yeah, good stuff. Well, guys, we want to thank you so much for being a part of Metal Mastermind. We really do appreciate you. We're using a new podcast tool today, Riverside FM. So once we edit this, we'll see how that works. Switching over from Zoom. But real quick, guys, head over to metalmastermind.com and check out our courses page. There's a lot of good stuff for you there, and we're working on some new stuff for you as well. So go to metalmastermind.com, check out our courses for metal musicians. Thank you guys once again. As always, create your own sound.